Hello, new viewer. And to the old viewers and other new viewers who have yet to arrive, and we'll see this a bit later. I believe in citizen philosophy. Okay. Why do I do this all of these many years? I could say 10 years, but it's coming on 15 years. And even longer if you include all the other online conversation I've done. And it's a matter of pride to have not done this for monetization, as that all came through as YouTube tried to get everybody to monetize. So prior to monetization, and specifically to not monetize, I mean, I really wish we had a place of non-monetized people, or at least that the site was non-monetized, even if people were selling their books or something. I'm not against people making money. You got to make money. But why I do this is citizen philosophy. Okay, I like to know what people's positions are and how they came to those positions. And I think people don't really know their positions, and this process is how we discover our own positions while discovering other people's positions. And the net result of millions of people doing this, I think, is a connected social mind. And I want to stay connected. Now, being connected to the social mind right now, it doesn't seem too healthy. And I'm not pointing any fingers or casting any aspersions. I think we're all in this state where, mental health wise, it's still the dark ages. Everybody has some lice and untreated fungus, skin fungus, and, these sorts of things. Though, of course, I mean mentally, using that as a metaphor. So, that's me too. We're doing our best, I think, trying to figure it out. Is important, and staying connected is a part of that, even if the individual doesn't figure it out. As a group, you're taking part in a process where it's going to get figured out better than if we didn't have these conversations. That's what I believe. Citizen philosophy, the public dialogue, keeping a connection. I care about your opinions. I care about your health. I hope you guys are doing okay. In your immediate health and your economic health. I know a lot of people are not, and uh, we can make this work out together. I strongly believe, but I'm worried, and this being, ultimately a philosophy channel, we have to be honest. We're all very worried. I'm not somebody that's going to be just a cheerleader and try to say it will work out good. I think it easily can. But it depends a lot on people cooperating, and you know how that goes. But I care about your opinion and health and welfare. And there's not much I can do about your health and welfare except for contribute to society in a capital way, in a monetary way, um, a material way through my own behavior and all that, and through funding a government that I think should provide many of the required solutions to mitigate this disaster or potential disaster. And I want to help people to find peace, or at least I care and hope and wish and pray and all the weak kinds of wanting that you would, as well as a stronger sense of wanting where I'm putting in my own energy, that you, as well as me, should find peace with your nonverbal self. I want to find peace with your nonverbal self, and you should find peace with your nonverbal self, and I will find peace with my nonverbal self, and hopefully you can find peace with my nonverbal self. We all have a part of us that is verbal, that understands language. We have another part that speaks to us in basically pictographs or comic sequences, frames of short or long animated images and sequences that convey meanings much like verbal language does. Except for there's a part of our brain that doesn't know verbal language, and it communicates with us through this pictographic language. And I don't think, as a society, most of us have a good relationship. And so it's like there's two selves. In most people, there's two major selves in constant conflict, with the verbal self dominating the other self, mainly because imagine if you're nonverbal. You're just as smart as you are now. The way you see the world somehow doesn't lend itself to verbal communication. So you probably understand language fairly well, at least like a very smart animal could. But your ability to produce verbal encodings of your thoughts is non existent. Um, and that's the situation for half of your psyche. It just doesn't get language in the sense of describing. If it sees an image, it will describe it with its own series of reaction images, as opposed to another part of yourself that would describe it with words. One side of the brain sees this picture behind me and reacts with a gestalt emotive reaction, which then can be expressed through a series of other images or related images or images it brings to mind. And the other side also gets a gestalt, but starts painting a description with words. Really, even if it's not asked, just to itself, it'll start describing with words. So I want to talk about truth because I think this is also a basic thing to help a brother and a sister out. And I put a link to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Truth Philosophy article on truth. So this is truth as it's been addressed in philosophy. Now, I'm not going to go into detail here, but it's a good read. I'm going to do some simplification and summary here where the first thing to know is this correspondence theory. And all these other theories, like coherence and pragmatic and identity theories, should be in here somewhere. They all appear throughout the history of philosophy, and indeed outside of philosophy potentially, where they're talking about truth. You could say anything where they're talking about the nature of truth is philosophy. Let's say legal systems, which are related to philosophy. The point is, these theories show up anywhere people are discussing truth, whether you consider it philosophical discussions or not. In correspondence theory, this is the major framework. The idea is that a statement is true if it corresponds to the way things really are. The problem there is, of course, with solipsism, skeptical arguments. How do you know how things really are? You never will. So how can you ever get to the truth? Sure, you could say the truth is out there. If you say something is true and it happens to be true, then it's true. But all the things we say are true, we could not know because we can't know for sure if it corresponds or not. So this creates a lot of reactions that you start to see in these Tarski theory of truth. Of course, it goes back quite a ways, but this is sort of the modern era where we start to have these encoding type language about information as a way of talking about truth. And it's just kind of interesting to me. That's where the trail spirals off. As a skeptic, I think that modern philosophy's gone off on a lot of weird tangents. These with truth. These other things are very interesting. Like a coherence theory of truth, where basically true systems are those that don't contradict themselves, as if any mathematical statement you might make that doesn't is a truth, right? Doesn't matter if it has anything to do with reality. Okay, so it's an interesting idea, but not what I'm going for with truth. Pragmatic theories, like the old positivists would, I think, have a pragmatic theory is kind of like truth's when you know enough. That's it. You're satisfied. And so it's true. All of these have this, from the skeptic point of view, it's like, well, you're never really going to be able to confirm something is true. You can define these as your criteria, but we notice you'll never confirm those criteria. Now, what I do, and I think this is the skeptic approach, but at least the, skeptical relativism, my form of skepticism, modern Pyrrhonism, I follow what I would call the honesty model of truth. So truth is when if if somebody says, okay, so first of all of these systems think of truth as a claim. Um, you're making a claim that something is the case, right? So that something holds, that it's an apt description of material reality, that other people would also, they exist in the same universe as it, and could possibly see or sense or whatever. It's a claim that something is true. That, well, obviously, but that's circular. So I mean, it's a claim that something, for example, in the correspondence theory, corresponds to the facts of the matter. But I'm just trying to back up a little. It's a claim, right? You're making a claim. A truth statement is a claim. So what is it a claim of? And to me, I think that when you make a statement, it's a claim that what you're saying fits your experiences, information you have from your film strip. That's why I use the film strip idea. And it's apt inferences, it's honest inferences. It's inferences that you at least believe follow from the data that you got. You haven't rewritten it. You haven't even lied to yourself. You could be honest to me, but have lied to yourself. If it's truly honest, you haven't lied to yourself, and you're giving me the honest information, including your doubts and biases, so that I can try to help decide if I think you've lied to yourself. These things would increase the amount of honesty. Now, can you have pure honesty? Well, no, because there's a lot of unconscious, and as I was saying earlier, nonverbal thinking that is very hard to track uh, in general, let alone to the like some 100% level. But you can certainly know that people sometimes intentionally lie. So compared to that, definitely there's honesty is a real concept, with a possibility of trying to achieve it and increase it and have more honesty versus less honesty. Okay, now how do you try to be honest? Because again, I believe we're here to give our positions and how we got to them, and to listen to other people's positions and their description of how they got to them. The reactions are chemical in nature, so any sorts of anger and all of this misery and frustration we see, that's possible. It's possible for people to go, oh, yeah, I agree with that. And it's possible for people to link up and make a chain of activism about the things they agree on. All of the above are possible. So many things are possible. All we can really say is that there's a reactivity that happens when we all give our position, describe how we got there, and as I'm saying, it's a process of discovery. We actually discover what we think through partaking in this process, because when people haven't taken part in this process, they're not really sure. They might be talking about a lot of rumors. I heard this. Well, do you believe it? I don't know. I just heard that. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you're bringing it up. You've decided not to take a position yet. When you start discussing what your position is and how you got there, then you also form and take and realize which positions you're willing to take, positions you might not even know existed, and were not really able to consciously take those positions. And yet it also feels like a sense, a process of discovery. And philosophy for the noobs in academic, college philosophy, when you're analyzing something like truth. Or what does love mean, or courage is an old-fashioned one. They don't like to talk about those truth and love. I mean, love and courage, but they still talk about truth, which is much like either one of those in terms of uh, sort of inherent complexities. But what they'll tell you to do is you start by thinking, well, what do people mean? What do I mean when I use the word truth or love? When I say someone loves another person, what about different kinds of love? The love of a mother for a child, the love of a child for a mother, the love of a husband for a wife, the love of a brother for a sister, the love of an aunt for a niece. You start just cataloging by basically saying these sentences and going, what would that mean? And if you write them down, you have an analytic process where you can start to categorize. And the thing is, certain subjects, like if you do that with an apple, what do people mean when they say an apple? Well, in a way, I mean, it's an example because it's so trivial. Well, I mean an apple, like you eat. Well, yeah, there's red and green. There's all these different kinds of fruit we want to categorize as an apple. And then there's also things that aren't apples that we call apples. Like if there's a painting of a woman eating an apple, we go, look, honey, in this museum we're at, in this example, a woman eating an apple, but it's a picture of an apple that she's eating, but we still use that language, and so we start going with categories. Okay, we might say that, well, that just isn't an apple. We call it an apple for shorthand, or you could say it's an apple, but it's an imaginary apple. There's a lot of ways your analysis can end up going, even for something like apple. But with something like truth, this is as bad as something like love. There's so many meanings of what you might mean by truth that if you take them all into account, you'll find it's a somewhat incoherent set. And it reminds me a lot of in computational theory for computers. So you've got the ability to do this kind of analysis of like, what do you mean by truth? What do you mean by apple? What do you mean by courage? What do you mean by friendly? What do you mean by inconsiderate? What do you mean by racist? You can ask all these questions and start to analyze and shake out just by basically you could just paramute and create every sentence, more or less an example of every kind of little sentence where you're using that word, every different kind of sentence, and categorize those and get all these categories. There'll always be categories. There'll always be multiple possible categories. You can always choose some. And you can go through this process and you can analyze anything, even something like love. But it ends up being just like with computers, where you can analyze anything with computers. You can turn love into a number from 1 to 100 or whatever. You're going to be making approximations and stuff, but you can still do it. There's certain difficulties, but then you can mitigate those difficulties and make some sort of simulation. You end up going, well, can everything be simulated with numbers? I would say probably not. However, you can apply that computer to anything. And let's say the thing does lend itself to numbers. You could certainly apply the computer analysis to anything that lends itself to numbers. But some things are what's called computationally complex. You can look up O notation, is one way to learn more about that, or just look up computational complexity. Certain problems are inherently difficult. The only way to solve them is through what we call in computer science brute force, which generally speaking means there's a quadrillion permutations of how this thing could be solved. The computer's going to solve it by trying every single one. That's distinct from when the computer can just zip right to the solution. So when you're trying to figure out a square root on a computer, you got to approximate, take the number you're guessing, you have to guess, and then square it and see how close you are. And if you're off, you got to make another guess and you zero in. Well, that's fine, but when you're doing the squaring, you don't have to do that. You don't have to zero in on that. You just calculate straight to it. One is more computationally complex than the other, and it's similar with philosophical and linguistic analysis. Something like truth, love, courage are computationally complex. Analyzing courage in philosophy was given up in modern philosophy, like well before our time, and it's kind of too bad. But there's a good reason for it, but it's also kind of too bad. One, they were expecting too much cleanliness in human concepts. Human concepts contain lots of contradictions, and their logical attitude in the modern era made them want to reject things like that. And so when they looked at something like courage and said, look, this is incoherent. This is not going to be a mathematical concept. This is a poetic concept. Let's take philosophy and move it away from poetics. I believe philosophy includes analytics and poetics, and especially the analytics of poetics. So, on the other hand, someone shouldn't be bothered too much about thinking about the philosophy of courage because it is just a human construct. It's a little bit like thinking about the architecture of the North Pole. It it's not fundamental enough to get hung up on like they used to when they thought that, well, the elements of courage was, I don't know, some breath of God that we were supposed to carry on. The point is, philosophy, when used to analyze things of a great complexity like truth or love, if you're going to make use of these concepts, requires eliminating certain kinds of answers. So while they're all interesting, in the case of truth, we want to zero in on honesty in my system because this provides a coherent core for what we're looking for. We're not looking for the fact that you are some godlike truth speaker that knows exactly what corresponds. You're making your models, you're making your descriptions, and an argument maybe of why your description is apt by pointing to the evidence that correlates with your system. And all that information of why you believe what you believe and that this is honestly why you believe it is a valuable thing to me. That, yeah, it might change what I believe. I might adopt what you believe, or in my case, my view is that I couldn't probably adopt it, but it will influence and take me in a certain direction. Now, the way as an individual to make sure that you're being honest involves identifying your own expectations. You have expectations. You need to know what your expectations are ahead of time. So, for example, if when I was younger, because of a lot of what the old baby boomer hippies were telling me, when I was looking into, is the universe some sort of a matrix or a nirvana, a Vishnu dream? If you visualize the rose, it will, materialize. Is it that kind of a universe? Well, if you're going into a question like that with the expectations that it is, you get a lot of hopeful ideas. And you need to beware those because those sabotage your honesty because of the good feelings you get from hoping for that and the good feelings you get from, I was going to say enduring, but really the word I was looking for is indulging your confirmation bias. When you indulge your confirmation bias and you feel like you've confirmed the thing you already had a little jolly about imagining, what if this, you undermine your honesty, obviously. You can prepare yourself against that by identifying your expectations. So, for example, when I was hoping that the world was some sort of visualize a rose world for a couple years of 18, 19, maybe 20, luckily I had this idea of trying to identify those expectations. I knew that I was so excited about the possibility of things like that to think twice about them and gather more data, which brings me to this other thing about being honest that's super important that we can forget in philosophy, the way we talk about it as citizen philosophers. Academic philosophy goes a little bit of an error in the other way, which is judging your secondary experts. If you're honest with yourself about the data that you are unable, maybe you even have this data, but you're unable to sufficiently analyze the data, you're going to have to use secondary, tertiary experts. You have to have a way of judging them, and also a way of being humble of where I can't judge them. I just have to adopt what is a consensus, and suddenly now I have to judge a quaternary uh, source that's judging what the average is of everybody. To a certain degree, if you find yourself in a situation like that, you might just have to be like, I don't worry about medicine because I can't be bothered to figure out which medical organizations to trust. I don't know whether to trust that, you know, one blog I read, or, you know, the World Health Organization or the CDC, and they all disagree, and then you just have to check out of those things. That would be the honest thing. But for things that where you want to care, well, you got to dig in and learn how to judge secondary experts. And again, you have to have already identified your own expectations, or else you'll just glom on, chemically attach to experts that are going to pre-confirm your expectations that you never prepared your own honesty to address. So, a practical advice is to consume the contrary. Now, in this whole milieu of all these three things, including consuming the contrary, I'm giving you the advice of what I do, and maybe it doesn't work. I don't know, because I do these things, and then my mental metabolism digests all that, and it finds itself more informed to remain more stable and less, hysterical about the ridiculous, absurd situations that the world finds myself in. Um, Absurd in that there's really great things, as well as the obvious absurdities. Um, but to consume the contrary, I mean, for example, I subscribe to people of, I try to find people that I can stand watching or enjoy watching, sometimes just stand, from various groups. When I found out, there was a bunch of narcissist analysis and recovery talk, I grabbed some subs that I've had for years. The um, the men's right movement, or even before that, not the Lonely Heart Club, not incel. Maybe it was the men's rights movement was the first acronym. This, I picked up some suds. Gamergate came along. I've still subbed to. Maybe I actually canceled my sub to Sargon, but I am sub to V, and I've canceled Sticks and Hammer recently. But I pick up other people, and I watch a lot of Mike Cernovich and Steven Crowder and all of these people. And in terms on the liberal side, I mean, I'm not very in touch in my personal life with any mainstream Democrats, like people that actually, love Hillary or would love a Biden. I always know the people that like the underground people more. So, fine. I go to Daily Kos. I've been going to Daily Kos recently, to see what the mainstream party loyalists believe. And you got to set out your feelers. And it's not just to consume the contrary, because even people that agree with you have this different take on it. If push came to shove and all the people that really disagree with you faded out, and it was just you and them, you also would have some differences. You might not want to look at them right now, but again, as a philosopher, we look at those right now. We don't wait until we're done fighting the enemy, because philosophy is about finding the truth. Why? Because it helps us survive better in the long run, but that's not why we do it. We're just sort of obsessed. We love that. We don't know. We just love that feeling. So, I was going to go into how the dark matter argument, because I've always been on a modified Newtonian dynamics kind of edge. And the idea of dark matter being matter-like is winning. But there was a time when they thought dark matter was just cold stars that had burnt out, for example. They eliminated that because if there was a bunch of material like that in the galaxy, it would absorb light. So they'd be able to see the spectral lines of what got absorbed. So And it split into this idea of a lot of scientists going, no, it's going to be modifying Newtonian dynamics, and there became different words for that, as the proposals maybe had errors and said, okay, well, not that, but we'll modify the dynamics in another way. And then really the matter-like argument's working pretty well because of galactic collisions and gravitational lensing approaches, which are super solid, and the math is so straightforward. Can't really doubt that. I still like the idea that physics is starting to work different at these scales. And a big idea right now is the quantum electrodynamic idea, or within that area, that there's a quantum, that there's an entropy, information entropy. And because you get so far from the galaxy, that the reference space is such that from different points in the galaxy, what counts as a Planck unit, what would be a Planck unit, what can you add up into Planck units, becomes warp. Remember, the galaxy is distorting space, so the size of space is actually, in a sense, changing, and that because of the laws of entropy and the fact that when you get to these big distances, you can only have the lowest amount of energy. As the energy is dissipating down, you can only have the smallest amounts, and this leads to this entropic effect that means that the force of gravity basically stops slowing down at the r squared law, and at a certain distance it slows down linearly. Because the thing about the galactic rotations, it's not just that the galaxies are rotating too fast, but their curve is the things that are way out on the edge of the galaxy are rotating way too fast, right? The speed of those things way out there should drop off, and it's going just as fast as the thing. So, in other words, there's a spoke, and it kind of trails a little bit, should be trailing a lot more, and that's why you have these spoked and spiral galaxies. And to me, the invisible matter thing, I mean, it had some charm to it, but also, with the LHC, they've eliminated some of the candidate particles from supersymmetry. Don't exist, or else we would have seen them. So, I mean, the message is obviously you need to be honest, and be truthful, try to be apt. Being wrong, not knowing yet, none of that matters. All right. Tinfoil Hatter, I'm just going to read your message later, okay? All right. Cheers, everybody, new and old, but especially new, of course. Power to the youth. Nothing wrong with that. Cheers.